go ahead and get started, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our second CSBA Sustainability Expert Beekeeper Chat. Today, we are very excited to have Brad Hogg with us. Brad Hogg is a beekeeper out of Lebeau, Manitoba. He runs Faith Apiaries. You might have seen him on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, That Bee Man at Faith Apiaries. Here we are in January, and a lot of us beekeepers are in this place where we're waiting for the next season. And a lot of us might be working on putting equipment together, maybe fixing equipment. And here we find ourselves in one of Brad's wheelhouses. Brad is an expert woodworker, and a lot of that shows in the beekeeping equipment that he either builds or assembles. Brad is going to spend an hour with us talking about some basic tools you might need in the wood shop, as well as tips and tricks he has learned along the way, little things you might want to know as a beekeeper as you're either assembling or repairing beekeeping equipment. Brad, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for asking me. I'm very humbled by the prospect of speaking to you and that you'd be interested in anything I have to say. And I'm going to ask you off the top, Brian. Um, I printed my outline, and I have no idea where it is. So,
I
if
got you.
if you want to kind of guide me as to what the next item is on the outline.
Yeah, I am happy
So
to walk
yeah,
you through the whole conversation, Brad. First of all, thanks for being here. Anyone who knows you as someone who has years of experience and brings that experience to his
God damn
teaching
it.
in his. John, you might want to mute yourself there, buddy. The years of experience in the wood shop. You were an expert woodworker before you even became a beekeeper, and a lot of those details really come through in the attention you put into your equipment. I am not a good woodworker. In fact, I'm probably the last person you want either fixing or assembling things, and I kind of come to you from that perspective, from the perspective of someone who's maybe a not skilled woodworker. What are some essential tools to own in the wood shop, and what might be some essential applications of those tools when assembling or repairing some beekeeping equipment?
yeah. Well, and I don't want to overstate my expertise. I've dabbled for many years, but I don't know if I call myself an expert. Um, I studied along about 2012, 2013, 2014. I really started taking my beekeeping or my my woodworking uh, interest a little more seriously. And what that means is the very first thing I did was I built myself a nice workbench. And this is a very simple build. Anybody could do this build, and it's an extremely robust workbench. The drawers are mostly full of tools, and as it sits, that workbench is probably in excess of 500 pounds. There's no way that I could pick up that workbench. You'd have to take all the drawers out to kick it down onto the collapsible feet. So anyway, that was just one of the first things that I built because I knew I needed somewhere to work. And then I studied everything I could study, kind of like we do with beekeeping. There's Wood Magazine, Popular Woodworking. Um, Fine woodworking is a really good one to get very, very specific on what you want to do. But through those studies, then I built some little projects that, just to kind of practice the craft a bit, right? So this is a nice little clock that I built with the plans from Wood Magazine. I think it was, no, it was Woodsmith Shop. That's a really good one too. They had a TV show and a magazine and, you know, other publications. So it kind of went from there. And then in 2015, I got into beekeeping. So as we know, beekeeping uses up a lot of your time, and I wasn't able to really continue with that level of woodworking. Um, I actually built some furniture for people. I built a beautiful big coffee table, oak coffee table for a friend. And I really enjoy that. It's a little stressful because every wrong cut costs you a lot of money and material because the materials are expensive. Now, would enter beekeeping, that's a little different. You know, you don't have to have fine furniture fit and finish. You're working with different finishes or none at all. You're working with different species of woods. Furniture, I'm using hardwoods. Beekeeping equipment, you can build beekeeping equipment out of some hardwoods, but generally it's softwoods. Spruce, pine, well, SPF, what they call spruce, pine, and fir is generally what the species are that use for beekeeping equipment. So that's kind of where I progressed through in my journey. And I've had a lot of practice because I've built a lot of stuff over the last 10 years. I've only been beekeeping for, well, it'll be 10 years this spring, so it won't be even that long. Probably only about 8 years building equipment. But I try to build functionality into my equipment, nice features that make the equipment nice to use and do the job well and look nice. You know, if you can make it look nice without too much effort or expense, make it look nice. That's my theory. And also last a long time. Do what you can to make it last a long time. So you talk about tools, and just like the equipment is tools. The equipment you're going to build, the equipment that I'm building is tools. So kind of if you haven't, I know tools are a big hurdle for a lot of folks because tools are not cheap, and you can invest in cheap tools or low cost tools, and sometimes those are fine. But using a good quality tool is a joy. When you use a tool and you end up swearing at it, it's time to throw that tool in the garbage and go and get, you know. So I'm a big advocate of investing in some tools, and you don't have to get too fancy to invest in proper tools. For example, one of the first one of the first kind of complaints or what people will say when I'm showing them how to do something, especially build frames, because when you're building frames, it's really important to have an air stapler or an air nailer. Tapping those things in by hand that's really difficult, and there's a certain level of construction that you can't achieve without an air nailer. So invest in a little air compressor, right? You can probably get everything you need in an air compressor for $100, right? You don't need a big one, you don't need a real expensive one, but probably look around that range and you can get something that's going to do the job for you for about that much. And you can spend 2 to 3 times that much, and you will get a bigger and a faster air compressor, one with a bigger tank, which doesn't cycle as often, that sort of thing. But I've dragged out some tools here, and this one I wanted to show you because this is it's a little T50 stapler. It's a very common staple that people use for all manner of things. You can see that kind of a staple, and that's used for mainly for putting uh, number 8 hardware cloth or even window screen. I use window screen for a lot of stuff as well. So that's one of those tools. And I bought this little Arrow Air. It's an air operated stapler. I bought this little stapler 2 or 3 years ago, and I just love this thing. I'm really in love with this stapler. It wasn't really very expensive. I don't remember what it cost, but I'm going to say it was less than $50. Really nice little stapler. Now
It's a
for
good
building
stapler
frames,
versus a bad stapler, Brad.
a bad stapler will, uh, well, it'll wear out faster. Uh,
Okay.
it's maybe heavy in the hand. If you're not doing very many pieces, that's maybe not a problem, but uh, I'm doing hundreds and thousands of pieces, so a little bit less weight is nice. And jams. A poor stapler will jam a lot more often. And again, you'll end up swearing at it.
Got
So
it.
uh, this is a this is kind of a it's a decent stapler. It's a Metabo. Metabo is the brand that Hitachi turned into. It's a decent stapler, and what it is it uses these. It's called a narrow crown
Yeah.
staple. So it's I think it's a quarter of an inch wide, that narrow crown. So that's the kind of staple I'd use for frames.
Yep.
Um, you can use just that kind of staple. You don't want to buy more than one stapler, but if you don't mind, I actually invested in a nice Senko stapler. This is a little higher end stapler than you're going to want to get for your, you know, if you're only building maybe 100 frames or something, you can get them a lot cheaper than this. But this is a really nice stapler. I love this thing. Uh, so this is what the staple I use for a top bar to go down through the top, and it's a
Yep.
medium crown.
Oh,
And I've learned that a medium crown staple isn't a fixed width. This is, I think, a 3/8 width. I have another big stapler that has about a half inch wide, and it's also called a medium crown. So anyway, that's that's the nice Senko. So
all right.
you
Can I
know, for
pause and ask you a
frames,
question or two here?
absolutely, yeah. Jump in, jump in.
And I want to add too to everyone listening, as you have questions, I forgot to say, put them in the chat and I'll add them into the conversation as Brad and I go. So I love
Yeah.
my air compressor. I love my stapler. Putting frames together is the thing that I do with it most. Sometimes my stapler misfires where just the staple doesn't come out. Why does it do that? Like
Well, I
every
think
two out of
that's
three.
2 out of 3.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, it could be dirty, it could be damaged, or it could just be an inexpensive stapler that's the nature of it. I
yeah.
don't know
Pro-
what
I'll
price range you
definitely
mentioned
see
on
for
that.
sure. All right, then here's my other
Yeah.
one. Sometimes when I'm
So that's
putting
one of the things.
staples in, like a staple will just blow out the side and for
Yeah.
no reason. What's
Yeah.
happening there? It's not hitting another staple. Why does it do that?
Sometimes it does, and it'll blow outside. But what happens there is you have, if I can find a prop here, it's a piece of wood.
Yeah.
And so you can see the grain in the end of that wood, and you can see the grain here. So the dark and light parts of the grain are summer and winter. Okay. The dark parts of the grain are the dark rings on the tree are smaller than the light rings. So the dark parts are winter and the light parts are summer. Okay. That's why you can count the rings in a tree and you know how old it is. So those two parts are a different density. The winter wood is going to be more dense than the summer wood. So if you have a grain that does this in the wood and you drive a staple, it's not guaranteed, but it could follow that grain and end up coming out the other side. And that's usually what happens. Or if you're trying to, sometimes I'm trying to cross staple, I'll put a staple in the top of that top bar, and then I'll
Mm,
put one under the ear, and
yeah.
that one under the ear hits the other one and it comes straight out the side.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
tip number one. Okay. This is tip number one, that you get a good understanding of how long that staple is. I think that's inch and a half, might be inch and a quarter. And you get a good eyeball on that and make sure you never keep your fingers closer than that to your staple gun.
Yeah.
Because if you're farther away than that, it can't reach you. And I know that. I've actually nailed this thumb to a frame one time. It was actually quite comical. I tried to let go of the frame and I couldn't let go of the frame. It came with me and I realized there was blood everywhere. So, because I wasn't following my own rule.
Got a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah,
Kathy
yeah,
asks,
let's go.
are the staplers lightweight?
They're pretty lightweight. Usually they're made of aluminum, and I don't know how heavy that is, but usually I think on the box when you shop for them, it'll tell you how heavy they are. And this Senko even, it's got a little more weight to it because it's got a bigger ram on the top, but it's still a nice lighter weight. I've actually in the past, I wish I could show you, but I haven't used it in a while. In the past, I use these coil. I use these coil hoses for my staplers when I'm building hundreds and thousands of frames. Just gives you really nice flexibility for moving the tool around. So what I have done in the past is I've actually suspended this hose up like this somehow so that my staple gun just kind of hangs above the bench. And then all I need to do is grab the staple gun, turn it a little bit and drive a staple. I don't lift much of the weight. It just
That's a
hangs there.
great tip. Great tip
And you
right
can,
there.
I'm I'm driving. Well, I'll buy a box of 5,000 staples and go through that in a week. And that's just one of the two kinds of staples that go in my frames. So that's really helpful. And these coil hoses, you don't have to get expensive ones. I know in the United States you have a Harbor Freight place. It's kind of similar, I think, what we call Princess Auto,
Yeah.
and that's all that is. They're not expensive.
Now, Preston asks, how effective are electric staplers?
I've never used one. I think they're probably heavier. They're probably really effective. Here, I'll grab a tool here. I've I've invested in the Milwaukee M18 line of tools, and it is an investment because once you kind of lock yourself into a battery uh, configuration, you kind of stick with that because you've got a big investment in batteries
Yeah.
once you do that. Um, Years ago, and in the late 80s, I was actually the provincial warranty mechanic for Milwaukee and Bosch tools, actually. So uh, I was always really pleased with how Milwaukee's were made, and I think they're still made quite well. But talk about weight, I actually bought the smallest battery that they sell, a 1.5 amp, for my drill. Because if anybody's seen me drive screws when I'm assembling pallets, there's like 40, 50 screws go in each pallet, and I can build 100 or more pallets. So that can start to weigh on the wrist. That's just me, though. I know I'm not really talking to people who are going to build 150 pallets, but I'm just saying because these batteries, that's a 5 amp, an ounce or pound above that is just something that's going to weigh on your wrist. So, yeah. Is there any
Doug
others?
asks, does Metabo shoot different lengths?
You can buy you can buy staplers that use a range of staples. So this one, I don't even know if it says. I don't have my old man glasses on. It doesn't, but it'll say on the box. Oh yeah, so this will drive up to 1.5 inches and as short as 1/2 inch. I have a quarter cable narrow crown stapler, but it'll only drive up to 1 inch. I fool it though. I can put 1.25 inch staple in there and it works just fine. So yes, when you buy one, you need to look at the length of the staples. You have to decide what you're going to use and then buy one that matches that length of staple that you're going to drive. So that's a really good question. Really good point I should have made.
Hey, you talked about using a stapler to assemble frames. You talked about attaching 8 mesh hardware cloth. Are there any other main jobs that you use a stapler for?
I use the staplers a lot, and mostly when I'm using staples not in frames, in something that's not a frame, usually I'm using it as a third hand. So what I mean by that is um, I've got a pallet over here. I'm going to lift this pallet up as a prop so I can more easily explain this.
Sure. I got some good tips on what to do with my jamming stapler in the chat. So thank you very much,
Good.
everyone. Appreciate that.
Okay, so this is an Ian Stepler style pallet. This is literally an Ian Stepler style pallet. That's exactly what I built for Ian. So what do I use staple for? Well, all of these shims, I call this top part, the shims, they're all stapled with this stapler. Okay. And I also use the small stapler when I'm putting this together, and I'm fussy. I'm really fussy. So when I'm putting this together, I want to get my riser that I call and my base nice and flush. I want to get that nice and flush. So it isn't, sticking out all over. And so I'll line that up and then I'll pop a staple in there and I'll pop a staple in there. So that just holds my alignment and then I drive screws,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So it's just a
Okay.
third hand, really. Staples are fairly inexpensive, although you usually buy them in 1,000 to 5,000 lots, so you could be spending $25 to $50 on a box of staples. But for most people, that probably lasts your lifetime.
Now, can you talk to about the importance of using glue whenever you're stapling, or when it is
Oh yeah,
important and when it isn't important to use glue? Like, what's the purpose of the staple? What's the purpose of the glue in different situations? I've had situations, Brad, I manage other people's colonies sometimes. So sometimes it's equipment I haven't put together. So I'll end up with the top bar of the frame in my hands, knowing that
yeah,
this frame never had any glue touch it. So can you
yeah,
speak to that a little bit?
absolutely. That's a topic that is dear to my heart. I just grabbed something else here to show you. Um, okay, here's one. Yeah, glue does most of the work. So if you don't use glue, you're missing most of your strength. Most good quality wood glue, and it's got to be a wood glue, will be stronger than the wood itself. If that part breaks, it usually splits the wood out, and the part that's glued to the other part will still be there. Okay, and uh, the fastener is mostly there for clamping pressure, right? If I'm building a project that I want to, um, like this little box, if I want to build this little box, there's quite often no metal fasteners at all. It's just glue. So I'll put it together with the glue, and then I'll take a nice clamp and I'll clamp that together. Well, when I'm building hundreds of these and maybe building 25 of these in a day, I don't have that many clamps,
Hmm.
right? Because it's got to be in clamps, about overnight, and I don't have that many clamps. So that's where the staples come in. They're not easy to remove, so you don't bother removing them. And they do offer some some mechanical strength, some adhesion. What a fastener offers you is shear strength. So you've got two pieces of material together, and a metal fastener will offer shear strength, so that if something wants to make it slide, then it's going to be very, very strong. But probably 80 to 90% of the strength is in the glue.
There.
I'm going to show you a few different kinds of glue here.
Yeah.
I mostly stick to the Type Bond line of glues. They're excellent glues. They're not that expensive. This is a nice. This is called Type Bond Original. So this is a glue that you would use for indoor projects. I don't use much of this on woodworking, on beekeeping equipment at all. If I was building that little box, I'm going to use Type Bond Original. Comes in a nice dispensing bottle and everything. Type Bond 2 is a step up, but in my opinion, Type Bond 2 is kind of irrelevant right now. It's sort of redundant because what it is it's a water resistant glue. So it's better for, say, frames, because we all know it's a humid environment in a beehive, and it can, work on the glue because the Type Bond Original, if once it sets, if you get it wet, it's going to dissolve. This stuff is more resistant. However, you can go even better. Type Bond 3 is a water resistant glue. It's not a glue for submersion, but for any projects that are uh, subject to rain, outdoor conditions, it's an excellent glue. It's a really good glue. And one of the really nice features about it is it's food safe for indirect contact. So I build cutting boards sometimes. I always use this for cutting boards because they get wet in the kitchen, and it's food safe. If you're turning salad bowls or whatever. So the beehive is food grade, right? We're producing food in the beehive. So I think that's an excellent choice for that. Yeah, it's more money. So you have to decide, right? But I wouldn't build frames with anything else. This stuff is amazing. I'm a big fan. I pay nearly $100 a gallon for this stuff, and I'll go through 2, 3 gallons in a year.
Will you share your glue bot when you get a chance too? That's super fun.
Yeah, and that's kind of why sorry, my nose is running a little bit. That's kind of why I showed this nice dispenser bottle, because that's really all you need. I asked for this for Christmas and my wife got it for me, and it's kind of cool. Uh, because I use the gallons, I don't get the nice squeeze bottle every time. This is a glue bot, and it has a top that seals because it has to be sort of airtight. So it's got a nice rubber seal there and a good lid on it. And then what happens is it's got a silicone cap. You squeeze the body of it, and the glue actually comes from down here up that way. So you can actually glue things upside down if you want, right? Because you can still get it to come out of there. Kind of neat. It's got a nice silicone tip here that the glue hardens, but you could peel it off. The glue doesn't stick onto there permanently. That's a nice little deal. This is the 16-ounce glue bot. I don't know if you can see the name. Fast Cap is the company.
Got a
So,
couple of glue questions. You ready?
yes,
Have you used the specific Type Bond glue them and Premier came out with exclusively for B frames and boxes?
a tight bond product? No,
Yeah,
I don't know what that would. I don't know what the advantage to that would be, other than probably charging you more,
yeah.
right? I see things like,
uh,
wood finishes for beehives. Oh, and it's way more expensive than anything else. There's really no reason to go to that kind of thing because, I mean, Type on 3, I mean, it's food grade glue. What more how much better can you get, right? Um,
Right.
and this stuff is nice because when you use it before it sets, it's water soluble. It's easy to clean up. If it sets, nothing's taking that off. If it sets, it turns. That's Type Bond. That's Type Bond 3 on the tip of that. It's hard. It's very good glue. So yeah, I don't know. I've never heard of that. I'm not a big fan of that because I don't think there's anything magical about um, glue to be used on beehives and frames. It's one of the one of the downsides, I guess, if you went to use Type Bond 3, is it's a little thinner than a lot of glues that you would use. I actually store it upside down because it has solid particles in it and it tends to precipitate and settle.
Okay.
So I just store it upside down so that when I use it, then I can give it a bit of a shake and pour it out. So usually works good for me. And I've stored this stuff for years and it's been good.
Gabrielle asks, would you suggest using glue on wholesale frames that one may buy in bulk? Not sure what she
I'm not
means by
sure
that.
what you mean by
Like if they're
wholesale frame.
already assembled? I don't know what you mean. If you can
Well,
clarify, Gabrielle.
you need to apply the glue upon assembly.
You can't
Um,
apply them afterwards.
yeah, uh,
Oh, she
you
says
know,
unassembled. Yeah, you can use glue with it
yeah.
if you
Well,
purchase them
this is
unassembled.
what I've got. You can't see it, but over here I've got a little caddy that I put my parts in. It's my frame building station over there. I can take you over and show you some of that stuff.
Sure,
Um, so so yeah, I mean everybody's seen this, right? My parts sit around so they dry at different rates. So sometimes they're tight and sometimes they're a bit loose. So yeah, I mean everybody's seen that, right? And maybe some haven't, you know. So I'll glue that, drive a narrow crown stapler through the bottom. I'll drive that medium crown on the top. A lot of people like to see a narrow crown this way. I do it because people like to see it. If I'm just doing it for me, I don't bother because I think that kind of idea came from the old days when they didn't use glue.
yeah.
If I put Type Bond in here, that extra staple is not going to really improve things at all. Uh, so yeah. Oh
Eric
yeah,
asks,
we do a couple thousand of these a year, I think.
so Brad, Eric asks, how about using epoxy, especially to repair boxes and to repair frames?
You can use epoxy. Well, oh, epoxy. I've never used epoxy for that. Uh, it probably work. Epoxy, I think, is weatherproof. I think it's waterproof and weatherproof. Another thing that's very robust glue is what on earth do they call this? Polyurethane glue. This is an Elmer's polyurethane glue. This stuff's a little messy. I had to use some uh, in 20, I guess it would have been 2021, because Type Bond had some issues and they couldn't supply glue. So I went through a few different glues. Elmer's has a Type Bond 3 light glue. It's a waterproof glue. It's meant to be the same kind of a product, a competing product. I bought some of that and I absolutely hated it because half of the stuff that I got was lumpy and I couldn't use it. I bought bottles I couldn't even get out of the container. So I had a
Hmm,
really bad experience with Elmer's uh, waterproof glue. I did use some of this polyurethane. My wife bought this for me years ago just for stocking stuffer, I think. And so I thought, well, I'll try this. Problem with polyurethane glue is you'll use it and then you clamp your piece or staple your piece together. And then this is like spray foam and it comes out all the cracks. And so then you have to go and trim it later. It's
okay.
pretty messy. I think is an excellent adhesion. You know, it bonds really well and it'll be waterproof. But I don't think you could consider this food grade. So
Yeah. All right, we've hit the stapler, we've hit the air compressor, we've hit glue pretty hard. What else would you consider some essential tools for the beekeeper in the
yeah,
wood shop?
well, I consider an essential tool. Well, I'm trying to approach this with the hobbyist in mind.
Yeah.
somebody maybe who doesn't have isn't going to make revenue in the wood shop directly to go and buy a bunch of tools. You know, for example, the crown jewel of my shop is my $4,000 saw stop cabinet table saw, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need that to build woodworking equipment. I will say if you're going to buy a table saw, don't buy a direct drive table saw. Most of them are that you get in your department stores and whatnot. You need a table saw that has a belt drive. I won't go into why. It's just a totally different beast. And there are some table saws that came out of the 70s and 80s that are very good table saws and very reasonable prices. And in particular, if you can find some of the old Rockwell saws, I've got one in my shed. It's a great old saw. I think I paid $75 for it. And it's a if I didn't have this saw stock, boy, I'd be using that. It's a great saw. Now, it doesn't have some of the safety features built in, so you got to be really careful with those things. And I will give one further tip. If you're looking at Rockwell saws, there was an era when they built saws with a 9-inch blade. Don't buy that because you can't buy 9-inch blades most places. Most table saws will be 10-inch, so you have to have a 10-inch saw. Um, but if you don't have or want to buy a table saw, uh, you may have a circular saw for making cuts. Um, I'll bring you over here. There's a whole line of different brands of miter saw. Can you see these okay, Brian?
Yeah, you're good.
My screen where I'm looking at myself is really tiny. So
No,
this is
you're
a
good.
miter saw. You can buy a standard miter saw that cuts wood like this, or you can buy one like this that's a sliding miter saw. So this can just cut a wider board. Sometimes you can cut a modestly wide piece of plywood or something on this. These are really good investment. They're not hideously expensive. I mean, you're going to probably pay a few $100s. You can get these. I think this is what is that, a 14-inch blade. You can get them with much more modest sizes to save some money. The sliding ones are nice because the ones that don't slide really don't cut more than about a 2x4. Uh, Another thing you can get for really inexpensively is these old guys here. This was something that started to be sold. Well, DeWalt invented this back in, I think, the 1920s. But it became really popular in the 60s and 70s because this is called a radial arm, so not radio like you listen to. It's radial, like radial tire, radial arm saw. And what happens is it just slides out like this.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Yep.
So one of the nice things about that is, uh, well, they used to cut everything on the miter saw, but it's stop start. It's like start, cut, stop, change, start, cut, stop, change, and it bothers me. This thing you just turn it on like the table saw and run all day. This is a really nice one. It's a 12-inch, but most of them are 10-inch, and that'll do most of what you want to do. You can get these. Sometimes you see them sitting by the curb for free. You can pay as little as $50 or $75 for a really good one. This one was built in about 1975. It's a Craftsman, um, built by a company called Emerson. And Craftsman didn't build anything. Emerson built a lot of their stuff. Uh, and you can do so many things with this. You can pivot the motor this way. You can pivot the turret to make angle cuts. You can pivot the motor this way and run the blade vertically, horizontally, and stuff like that. Don't do that. That's dangerous. Like they sold this thing as the do-all saw, right? And I'm a fan of buying a good tool to do one job really well, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm a fan of. I'm not a fan of do all tools. I have some, but I'm really careful with them to make sure they still do the job well. So I find that this is a fantastic saw. I use it mostly. You can kind of see here that it kind of lines up with my door, right? So
Hmm.
I have outside, I have some 16-foot lumber. So I'll open my door, um, and I'll pull this saw. I've got some wheels on. I'll pull it out a little bit, and I'll bring my 16-foot lumber in here and cut it up into lengths that I need to use. And it's just I love this old saw. This is I paid a lot more for this one because it was brand new condition, and it's a 12 inch, so it's more powerful and it cuts, really nicely. So that's a good choice, but you have to be careful with any tools. Like you can really hurt yourself with these. What often happens is the thumb, right? Because somebody will have a board that they put down and they pull the saw and they cut the thumb off, right? So you just have to really watch what you're doing. Here's a tip that I've kind of learned is when you're using machines like this, you never want to you never want your hands to be outside of your field of view. Usually when somebody gets hurt, it's because something distracted them while they're doing something and they're not looking in the direction of where their hands are. I mean, there's lots of other dangers, but that's one of them. If you allow yourself to be distracted by something and you're just doing something by muscle memory, that's when you're going to lose a finger. So there's a woodshop safety tip. Um, I'll diverge a little bit from that while I'm over here. Look at this little project I built. I just kind of threw this together, and this is one of the handiest things I've ever made. I call it my frame caddy. I've got my end bars here, I've got my bottom
Oh,
bars, I've got my
yeah.
top bars. It's all set in here because what I had was if you open a pack, like these come in packs of 100, if you open a pack and you build 25 or 50 frames, now you've got this open pack of parts laying around. And then I wanted to move it somewhere and I'd have to gather them all up and move it and make sure they didn't fall on the floor. So this thing is so nice because I can pick it up and move it anywhere. All the parts sitting there. It's so easy to make. It's just a half-inch plywood butt glued together. It's really a simple project and one of
Brad,
my
the
favorite things.
second you described what it was, I saw the solution to the problem
Yeah,
that all of us experience when putting frames together. Because you open one of
you
those
do.
up and they just go everywhere. And
Exactly.
it's
Well, no
so
more.
simple. Yeah, what a great
Yeah,
idea.
it is. And we're going to look at some of the diagrams later, and it's on there, so you can see that. Um, so yeah, what I was going to say about if you're trying to mass tools in your shop to do different things, and you still have to make sure the tool you're buying is going to do the job you want to do. One of the more versatile and useful and not that expensive tools is a router. This is a good old, they don't even make these anymore. This is a good old Porter cable, what is this, 670 or something? 690 router. Okay. There's nothing fancy about it. It's a good old on-off switch unit, no fancy stuff at all. But boy, what a workhorse. This thing is fairly powerful. It'll take um, quarter-inch shank bits, and it'll also take half-inch shank bits in there. So it's versatile that way. And if you're trying to make boxes, you could cut box joints with that. You could cut rabbet joints with that. You can cut dados. You can cut grooves to put maybe you want to make some Mike Palmer style 5 frame side by side. So you make a groove in the box to slide a divider in. Well, that's your tool right there to make that groove. And as a second to that, picked up this little guy one day And it turns out that this is my go-to, mostly because of what I do. It's called a Bosch Colt, and this is kind of an old one. There's a lot of different ones today. DeWalt has a really good line of portable um, routers, and they're coming out with some really good cordless ones too, like Milwaukee and DeWalt and different makers. They have the battery operated ones. Um, this I use largely. I don't know if you can see the profile of that bit, can you? It's kind of
Yes.
it's a little half round.
Yep.
So I use that on my covers to round over a lot of the edges on my covers. Makes them nicer to handle, and it also allows the interlocking feature to work a little better. And I know I haven't described what that is, but it does. The last thing I'll say about routers is another thing you can do with them, and you can buy these, but I built this one. It's a really quick throw together router table. And so this has the same Porter cable 690 mounted under here. Um, it's just a it's just a piece of plywood with my router mounted under there. I just set it here. I bring my vise out on my bench, set it there, put my clamps in. I've made a rudimentary fence for it. Set my fence up to what I'm doing. Put my clamps on there. Really low tech. And I'll tell you, I built some white oak fine furniture with this router table. I make um, trim profiles with multiple cuts on this router table. Just kind of shows you. Sometimes I think, gee, I wish I had one of those really nice retail, you know, $1,000 router tables. But this doesn't slow me down at all, really. It's highly adjustable, very flexible. So router tables, those are if you're going to be building box joints, you could set this up to build, like say if this was your box side, right? You could set that up. This is already a square bit. You could run that through like this, you know, to make a box joint. Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
quite see that,
Yeah. No, I
right? So
can.
you get the idea. So that's the flexibility of a router. And then you can buy just a myriad of, of router bits. I bought years ago a really cheap set of router bits that I've screwed to the wall here, and they are cheap. They're not great bits. However, there's almost every profile you want there. And so what it does is I can use those bits until they're wore out. And the ones I wear out, I'll go and buy really good replacements because that's the bit I use. This
Yeah.
allows me to have the bits that I might use on hand, for $50 for the whole set. Whereas I could go and spend $50 or more on a really nice router bit if
Sure.
doing a nice project. I think my top router bit I've spent, I don't know, we've been well over $100.
Wow.
And that's another thing when you're buying tools, you know, whether you have a saw or a router or even a screw gun or anything like that, you might be really thrown back about, wow, I went to buy a blade for my saw and it was $90. Well, that's where the rubber meets the road. So bits and blades and things like that, they're expensive. And if you buy cheap blades, you're going to get cheap blades. It's one of those things you say, they say you get what you pay for. Well, you don't always, but in the world of blades and bits, you do.
Yeah. And your little router table setup really demonstrated your idea before of like multi-use tools definitely have a place, but having a tool for a specific job, like that's already set up, ready to go. There's no conversion that needs to happen from one use of that router to another use. It's already ready to go. And I haven't necessarily experienced
Yeah.
that in the wood shop, but in my beekeeping operation. That's definitely one thing I learned is buying a piece of equipment for multiple jobs only works if I'm doing those multiple jobs very, very rarely. If those jobs are jobs that I'm going to be doing regularly, I need a specific piece of equipment dedicated to that job. And I see you doing that very
Yeah.
same thing in the wood shop.
I see hive tools. You see some people using hive tools, and usually on YouTube because that's where you see most other beekeepers. They'll have a hive tool with like 8 different features on it, right? And when I see that, I kind of think, gee, uh, some of that stuff looks like it'll get in the way of doing that one job really well,
Right.
right? So I'll just show you kind of when I set that up, I changed the bit to uh, it's called a chamfer bit, and I brought it out here to show you. And oddly enough, I've I've done thousands of lineal feet of work with this, and this is the cheap one that I bought in that case. So it's just a 45 degree, right? And the bearing
Hmm.
is you run the material on the bearing, and it keeps the depth set really nice. Um, I think it was these bearings you can replace. I actually on that little roundover, I had to replace that bearing. It locked up on me last season, so I just took it off of another bit that I wasn't using and changed it out. But that chamfer, I'll run all of these. I don't want to hold that up. All of these runners. Can you see that chamfer here? Is that
Yes.
apparent?
Rounded off nicely.
Yeah, it's a bevel. So it's
Okay.
specifically a bevel, and that's so that when you set this, let me get the cover.
Yeah. So while he's grabbing that, just so people understand, so these two-way pallets are meant to stack on top of the lids so they fit on really nicely, and those bevels are meant so that if it's not perfect, it can kind of set on and kind of fit right into place. Is that a good description, Brad?
Yeah, yeah. So you see how that kind of goes together
Yep.
with the cleat on the cover and the runner on the pallet. And I noticed in my first year I didn't do that. I didn't round over this part and I didn't bevel that. And I noticed that it didn't take much for that to catch and not fall into place. But with that little bevel and the round over, it catches a lot less often and it sits right in there. And that's for transporting and whatnot, which I understand not a lot of people are doing. But that's what Ian's using now, and he can speak for himself. He seems to like it.
So as we look at materials, Brad, wood's your
Yeah,
material you're using primarily. What are your thoughts on treatments? What are you doing to that wood to create longevity in that product? Are you painting? Are you wax dipping? Or are you doing something different? Because building a good quality product is one thing, but then
yeah,
putting something on the doing something to it to make it last a long time is something
absolutely.
beyond that.
Because if you don't do anything, your hard work is gonna and your investment in your lumber is gonna fall apart in a couple of seasons. Um, I have wax dipped almost everything I built. And that's mostly because it's very effective, it's very cost effective, and it's available to me. It's not available to everybody. Um, as far as paint goes, I think everybody kind of knows about paint and how to use it and what to watch for. But the wax dipping, uh, they kind of boil this in a paraffin microcrystalline mixture wax, and it sort of boils out a lot of the water in the wood. And when they take it out, it cools, it pulls the wax into the interior of the wood. And I'm about 9 years in now. I've never seen a box. I've never seen a piece of equipment that's wax dipped. I've never seen one rot. Now, they will turn. This is a fairly old cover. I'm actually going to say that this is probably a second year cover. So still nice. This has never been outside. And this is what they look like after they've been outside. But the water doesn't collect in here. It doesn't go into the wood. because it has wax inside there. So the surface of this wax will wear off, right? It's kind of aesthetic. Um, but yeah,
Is there a benefit to
uh,
repeating that wax dipping over time?
absolutely. I think you could definitely at least keep the equipment looking nice. Um, it's a little difficult because unless you own your own wax dipper and you're uh, willing to put up with the downsides, this equipment has to be extremely clean before you put it in your wax dipper because
Right.
any particulate, any little bit of dirt or anything on there is going to go into the wax and it doesn't settle in the tank. Anything you put in that wax, you're going to pull out and it's going to be have all of this crud stuck to it in the
Yeah.
wax. I've seen that. Very frustrating. Um, so if you don't have your own wax tank, you're probably not going to be able to convince somebody to dip used equipment. Also, if you don't have your own tank, there is a biosecurity issue with trying to take used equipment to somebody else and put in their in their dipper. Now, wax dipping equipment can even kill AFB. However, it's still used equipment, and before it goes in the tank, it's still a problem. So if you don't have your own tank, then re-dipping isn't as much of an option.
Yeah. Now there are some folks out there selling wax dip equipment now, and there are folks selling wax dipping tanks, but like you said, the cost is pretty exclusive. If someone is choosing to paint their equipment, what advice do you have for them if they're going that route?
Not much. I'm not much of a wood finisher. I'm not much of a painter. Um, I have painted equipment with good quality latex paint. I always prime and then paint. I use a sprayer. You can roll it on, make a good job, but because of the way the handholds and stuff are, and I spray it. I use it's called an Earlex brand. It's a high volume, low pressure spray gun. Also not hideously expensive, and it works really nice. So I like to spray it. It's fast too, way faster than brushing or rolling. But I think just buy good quality paint and make sure you put a really good coat on it. I think people generally repaint their equipment every couple of years, but I don't paint, so it's hard for me to really give much advice there.
Sure. Um, there's a couple of people in the comments asking about your designs. Do you want to transition to the SketchUp piece?
Sure. I think I want to talk right now though about material because I'll go
Go
sit
for it.
down at the computer here
Yep.
when we do the SketchUp. So um, again, you could build out of hardwoods if you want. Oak is a really good outdoor wood. Um, there's I know it is gopher wood, but it's what is that? It's a Florida kind of a wood that's good for outdoor, but I understand there's two types, and one is not good for outdoor, and the other is. So you can use that. If you're using hardwoods, though, your equipment's going to be a bit heavy. So if you've got a couple hives and your hobbyist is maybe not an issue. If Ian puts 50 hives on a truck and every hive weighs 5 pounds more, that adds up, right?
Yep.
That kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with softwood. There's nothing wrong with it. It's called SPF. The grade is called SPF. Spruce pine fir is what the species that are allowed in the SPF grade. So that's what I use. And um, I just saw something today. I think it was on Facebook, and I thought, I would talk about this because I'm not a fan of any kind of um, press board product. And one thing that people use and they rave about, but only for the first couple of seasons, is a Vantech
9 p.m.
because a Vantech is kind of a water resistant press board product. Does everybody know what I mean by press board? It's
Yes.
not pressed board. It's called oriented strand, OSB. Got some right here, so. Chipboard, sometimes people call it. That's
Yeah.
OSB. Don't
Yep.
build stuff out of that. I build prototypes out of that, right? It's cheap, it's easy to get. And if I want to build a prototype, then I'll build it out of that sometimes. But that's not going to stand up. I don't care if it's a Vantech or not. The Vantech will stand up longer. But you know, if you're going to build out of that, you're going to spend all of your extra money on paint to protect it because
Right.
that is not an outdoor product. Also, yep.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
Well, also talking about not an outdoor product, I'll show you this. This is my fence on my router table. It's not always apparent what you're looking at, but this is also not an outdoor product. It's an SPF kind of a plywood. It's got a nicer finish on it, and you can see that finished layer is a very thin veneer. This is a birch plywood. This is for kitchen cupboards. It's not for outdoors. And the difference is it doesn't have a waterproof glue. It doesn't have a waterproof bond. And the plywood that you get should say that stamped on the plywood, waterproof bond. And the waterproof bond is what you want. If you don't get that, it'll start to delaminate once it gets a little bit damp. I'm just kind of looking around here for a scrap of the waterproof stuff.
Now I have to go to my Home Depot and look for that stamp because I've taken a 4x8 sheet of plywood and made plenty of migratory covers off them, never even thinking to know which plywood to look for. So now I do.
So typically the plywood that you want, it's not something you want to build kitchen cupboards out of. It's a little rough. You know, if you get sanded plywood, that's going to cost you way too much money.
Right.
It's just stuff that they would sheet a building with, you know, because it's waterproof. It's not especially, you know, a high, beautiful finish on it that you don't need to pay for. And that's the stuff that you want to build your equipment out of. This stuff has six plies to it, and that's a nice. This is a 3/4, so it's a full 3/4 of an inch. Usually that stuff for kitchen cupboards is not. It'll be 11/16 of an inch. So now you've got to compensate with all of your measurements and stuff. This is a good 3/4. So there's an eighth. Every ply is an eighth, and this is a nice stable plywood. And plywood is inherently stable, but it's not perfect. Do I have time to talk a little bit about wood movement and stability?
You bet.
Hey, use this for my prop because it's got a nice grain that you can see. This is a piece of red oak. I don't use this for beekeeping equipment, but you can see the grain. So now, wood has, you can think about wood. If you've ever seen a box of drinking straws, that's what wood is, right? It's a collection of drinking straws, and so that those drinking straws will be this direction. You can see the grain. That's exactly what that is, and so you can see the end of it, and that's you're looking at the end of the drinking straws. So this end is somewhat porous, right? And also the drinking straws are strong this way, but they're not as strong this way because there's a whole bunch of drinking straws and you could break those apart. And that's shown here because this piece is cracked. So it cracks between the drinking straws. It's never going to crack this way. Never,
Right.
never crack this way. Always crack it in grain because the drinking straws come apart. Now, why does that happen? Moisture. Wood is hygroscopic, right? It absorbs moisture from the air and it'll release moisture to the air. So every time it does that, it changes size and shape. the length of the drinking straws, the length of the grain, it doesn't change length in a perceptible way. Theoretically it does, but it's not ever a consideration. Across the grain, it does. Those drinking straws will absorb water and they get bigger, and then they dry out and they get smaller. And that's exactly why this tracked. So what happens is you can see this has worked, right?
Yep.
So that's what happens I planed this. This was flat when I planed it, right? This has been here for a week or so, and it worked on me because there's always internal tension in wood. And as wood gets wet and dries, it's going to do that. And it's always going to warp and it's always going to change size and shape. So the reason I say that is because you can see this cover. I built this cover out of 2 pieces of plywood, right? This piece of plywood has the grain going this way, and this piece has the grain going that way. Now you say, well, that doesn't matter because it's plywood, and each layer of the plywood has the grain going the opposite way, and you're right. And that's what makes plywood so stable. That's why I'd always recommend use plywood for something like a bottom board or a cover and not lumber. Lumber will shrink and you'll get cracks in your cover, the warp, all of that kind of stuff. Plywood is way better. Use a good 3/4. 5/8 plywood is probably good too. 3/4 is just that little bit better. I did build some 5/8 covers one time, and I could actually tell when I picked them up the difference in weight. So there's that little bit of trivia. Now, here's the big gist of this. This is, sorry, I'll show you this side. This is the direction that I prefer to build my covers. Because when this gets wet and it changes size, it's going to expand this direction, right? So if it's going to try to warp, it'll try to warp this way, either up or down, one or the other. Actually, when that gets wet, it'll probably try to warp up because it's just the top layer that gets wet. It gets wider. The bottom layers don't get wet and they don't get wider, so that the thing will get warped this way. My cleats avoid that. They keep it stable. They keep it flat. You know, can you imagine trying to take this in your hand and bend it this way? That'd be pretty hard. This one, not quite as hard, but still pretty difficult. Between the two, nearly impossible. Now, this way, I have a little 1/2-inch shim here, and a lot of guys don't use a shim at all. So there's not nearly as much keeping this cover flat this direction. So that's why I want to put my grain this direction,
Gotcha.
so that it's less likely to warp this way, right? Yep. No guarantees, right? Because you got rain on this side, you've got a warm, moist colony on this side, so you've got differing atmospheres, differing conditions on top and bottom, and it can just end up in warping over time. So this I built as a cheap, was being cheap and using up some lumber, so I ended up with the grain this way. But on this one, I put it this way. But it's still pretty good. It's not really warped. You asked about repairs is why I brought this out. You see what happened here? My cleat broke.
Oh, sure.
So, like, how would I fix this? Well, I'd go and cut myself a new cleat. I'd try to either take these nails out or cut them off, clean up this area, cut a new cleat, glue and nail that on like before. The problem is this is a wax dipped cover. Now my repair is not going to be wax dipped. So I could paint that. I have a buddy who'll actually wax dip it again for me. So, or just leave it nothing, you could do that.
Yeah.
So, repairs, I have to be in the mood for repairs because every single repair has a different solution. You have to be a Sherlock Holmes. You have to be a problem solver. I want to show you something I did. I'll bring the camera because I don't think I can carry it over here.
Sure.
So when I'm extracting, I'll have a tote beside the extractor. And if I get frames that have a little bit of damage, I'll throw them in there. And then in the off season, I grab that tote and I start fixing things, you know. So this old frame had a broken bottom bar, so I put a new bottom bar on it. You know, this one, I don't know what happened to that one. Probably not much. This one had a broken, probably just an ear broken off. So I put a new, it's a crappy old frame with a brand new top bar on it. So the challenge is when these are glued together, it's a little harder to get them apart so that you can fix them.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's the challenge with repairs is every repair is a new solution.
So
So
I am the type of beekeeper that has a pile of equipment that is in the to be repaired pile. And eventually
yeah,
I go through that pile and throw stuff out. Nothing ever actually
yeah,
gets repaired. It
just
actually
have a
just gets,
bonfire.
yeah, it just gets
Yeah,
culled out or
and
like pieces will get used periodically. Yeah. And
I
I guess
worked on
one
that.
thing
I
we
think it
didn't
was
even
December. I
talk
was working
about.
on that,
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
and I was just saying I was working on that in December, I think, and the whole time I'm working on it, I'm thinking, what's $1.50 worth? Like it's $1.50 for a new frame, and I've got them right there. It's not like I don't have them, but you just can't. You think, well, but those end bars are still good. I can save it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what
So
I was
it's
gonna
just one of
say
those
too, is
things.
every beekeeper has to go through that decision making of time that you have versus money you can save versus enjoyment. Like, let's face it, you love putting stuff together in your wood shop, and that's not true with every
Yeah,
single beekeeper. So that's a factor in the equation of whether or not
yeah,
you're gonna fix those frames. And my less than willingness or affinity for working in the wood shop is a factor in my equation. And that's something, and my equation has changed over time. When I started out, I was going to assemble every single frame because I wanted to pinch every single penny. And now I'm about saving time so I can allocate my time in other parts of
yeah,
my beekeeping operation. So you've always got to make these
yeah,
decisions, time versus interest versus money.
yeah. You're right. Everybody has their different reasons for it, and I would usually tell people don't bother building boxes because you can usually buy them just as cheap as you could build them. Go do something else with your time, right? Build bottom boards and covers and two-way pallets or whatever. Like, that's what I do. However, if you want to build your boxes, by all means, build your boxes, but just don't go into it thinking you have to always cost it out. You can't go into it thinking, I'm going to do beekeeping on the cheap and build all my equipment because you're not. It's not going to work out that way. Uh, you can save money on some stuff. I mostly build things like the covers that I showed you, the pallets I showed you. I mostly build those because nobody does, right? No, nobody builds those. You can't buy those anywhere I've seen. Plus, I can customize those with some of my ideas and how I want to manage bees. Let me show you a couple of those things. I'm kind of proud of this, so let me show you this.
Yeah, absolutely.
With this, how's the time? I don't know how time. I don't have a clock.
Brad, it is 8:15 and we have as long as you want to go.
Oh, don't say that. So, um, what I did here, this is about the third iteration of this palette. I keep updating it. I think I've settled on the design now. So what I did here is I decided to build this palette because I do move my bees sometimes and I do haul. I use the same palette for my honey harvest. I'll put my honey supers on these. Um, and there's a clip that goes here too. I'm gonna grab that to show you. There's a there's a U clip. It's 2 inches cube, and that goes right on here. The box sides sit in that, and that holds the box on the pallet nice and secure. It works really well. So what I decided to do was when I put my my boxes, my hives or my honey boxes on my trailer, and then I put my strap over it. The strap always pulls everything together, right?
Yeah.
And if it acts on the lid, then it can push the push the boxes off of the pallets or stress that. If it acts on the pallet, then it can dislodge the boxes or the lids or something. So what I did was I made my covers, and this broken lid is not going to be quite as apparent. My cover and my pallet are exactly the same dimension front to back, right? So when I put those on my trailer, the the pallet and the cover up here will contact all at the same time. So it all comes together in one big solid block. So that was one feature I incorporated. Another one that I started just a season or two ago. Again, talking to Ian because I was building some stuff for him. If you've seen Ian's videos, you know that his addiction is tipping his colonies back, right? You ever
Yes.
see that?
Yes.
I'll tip this
Yep.
colony back, and then, well, I better stop tipping my colonies back. We'll just do one more, and like 10
Just
later,
one
it's like we'll
more.
just do one more. So, and I know he's watching, so that's why I say that. Um, so what I did for him was I made this back piece wider, so when he tips the colony back, it's got somewhere to sit. It doesn't slide off. Right? That's
Yeah.
why this back shim is as wide as because it only needs. I was just making it 1 inch before, but now it's I don't know what it is, inch and a quarter, inch and a half, something like that. So those are just some of the little features that I've come up with over the years. There's about 4 iterations on these pallets now.
And like we said
Materials, and
earlier,
you had
they
mentioned.
yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like
No,
we said
you go
earlier,
ahead.
they interlock so that when a pallet sits on top, it sits right on top of the lid, and you've made the pieces the exact right spacing, so there's no movement there. It's a really nice system.
Um, So you mentioned earlier, well, when we talked before, you asked about polystyrene equipment,
Yeah.
and I have a little bit of experience with it. Um, I've noticed that the bees do really well in it, and I could talk at length, and you've heard me talk at length on live streams about insulation on a hive, and I'm trying to use terminology specifically because the hive is the house, the colony is the bees.
Right.
So the insulation value in the hive then decouples the inside environment from the outside environment, and it doesn't force the bees. Remember that insulation does not keep things warm. Okay, that's a very important thing to remember because insulation can help keep things cold too. You have a cooler with your nice brews in it, that's going to keep it cold. Well, it's insulated. Why doesn't it keep it warm? Because it doesn't keep things warm. It decouples it from another environment. So it doesn't keep them warm and it doesn't keep them cool, but it just allows them to manage their own environment a little more easily, right? Ventilation, heating, cooling, that kind of thing without constant fluctuations. Solar gain, you get that sun beating on it. It's a wooden box and it's hot. Well, if it's a poly box, it's going to be less of an influence on the inside. I've noticed the bees do really well in them. They're very popular in Britain, polystyrene hives. Um, they're not as robust as wood, for sure. If you're prying on them with a hive tool and stuff, it's not going to be as hard as wood. It's not going to stand up as well. If you're throwing boxes around, yeah, they're not going to stand up as well. So you
And
just
your
have to be
smoker will
aware of
melt
that.
it.
Well, I think it will. I have
No,
mine.
ask me how I know, Brad.
Yeah, you have. Is it a Dayton smoker?
I don't know. It was just leaning against the side of it, and it just started
Oh, okay.
melting the side of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The way the Dayton smoker is built, I've learned that it won't melt them if you set it on the top. Like if you just set your smoker on the top of it, because of the
Oh
way the
no.
Dayton smoker sits. It doesn't sit on something. It's only got a couple of points of contact, so it doesn't get hot. But yeah, if
Yeah.
it's leaning on the side,
Yeah.
you
But if I
definitely,
did that with the
and
wooden box, it wouldn't have been a problem, right?
no,
But with that
no,
polystyrene, it just melted a little dent right in the side of it. I think when people
and it
think
makes a big
about
mess of your
wooden
smoker.
versus, yeah, yeah, exactly. When people think about wood versus polystyrene, they think about from a sustainability issue, two things. How long is this material going to last? And then some people are concerned about that product in the landfill. And I'm not
Of
sure. I
course,
think there's pros and cons to both. You know, obviously wood
yeah,
is more biodegradable than a polystyrene
yeah,
product. I
yeah.
think some people would argue that polystyrene could last longer, but like you said, it can get beat up really, really easily, like wood doesn't necessarily get.
I know by experience that wax moth larvae can eat right straight through a polystyrene box. They will make a mess of polystyrene if given the chance. They sure will. Plus your oxalic acid vaporizer. There's a clash between that and a meltable polystyrene box. Now, I recently got an instant VAP, and he provides a little silicone condom for the thing,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
so when I put it in the entrance, it can sit in the entrance without melting the polystyrene. So he's kind of addressed that. There's different ways you can address that too, but yeah, those are definitely the things to consider. You know, I mean, I love the organic nature of wood, right? I love its idiosyncrasies. I love putting up with the fact that it changes size and shape, and just the whole, I don't know, just the whole thing about it. Plastic frames, I've gotten rid of my plastic frames. I love the wooden frames. I mean, I love my plastic foundation because of the way it functions. But wooden frames, I just think it's nice. I can fix wooden frames, as we've seen, right? You can't fix plastic ones. And then there's the landfill thing,
Right.
all of that. Yeah.
Now, I know
So
plastic frames have the benefit of no assembly needed. I just don't
I
like how
agree
they
because they're out of the
flex.
box and away you go. Yeah, they flex
Right.
and oh, don't get me started. Don't be
Yeah.
started on. I'm just gonna grab a bottle of water.
That's why I don't want to do anything with those. Hey, Brad, we are about out of time. I would love for you to just spend a minute sharing the plans that you have put together on SketchUp while you're getting a drink. Let me introduce people to that idea. There's I don't know if it's a computer program or a website called SketchUp where Brad has created all of his designs for all of the different materials or products he makes for the beehive. You can go on there for free. All of his designs are there for free. I will make sure as this video ends up on our YouTube channel that all of those links are posted on that YouTube video so you can see that all. But it's called SketchUp. I think it's a program that anyone can really use and just put things. I believe there are similar things that people use for like 3D printing designs, just like a library that people share the different work that they do. And I believe Brad is pulling this up on his computer so he can share it with us really quick. Um,
Okay, I'll
while we're,
share this.
there you go. Yep.
Can you see that? All
Yes.
right. So this is just a diagram of that parts caddy. The bottom part. Can you see that pointer, Brian?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this bottom part is just a concept. I didn't build it like this, but the top part is the parts caddy. So SketchUp is nice. You can do your diagrams. I like to use it because I can make sure my project is actually going to fit together. Uh, y- you learn how to build the parts, and then you can put the parts together and take them apart and do your measurements. How long is that kind of thing, and whatnot. So I'm not going to do a SketchUp tutorial here. Now, what you're looking at is the free version of the computer program SketchUp. They don't offer that anymore. I've still just got the old one, but they do offer a free version of a web browser-based SketchUp, and it's still pretty good. There's not really any compromises there. Um, it it takes a little bit to kind of get to learn how to do it, but it's really not hard. Um, the best tutorial I've seen for woodworking and SketchUp is a gentleman by the name of Bob Lang or Robert Lang. He has a really good SketchUp tutorial, and he just updated it like 6 months ago for the new version of SketchUp. So he stays up to date on it. And you can use SketchUp for more than just woodworking for a lot of things, but he's a woodworker, so he teaches it from a woodworking perspective on SketchUp. So um, what I'll show you, let's see. Now, did I share this? Are you seeing, what are you seeing, Brian?
I'm still
Uh,
seeing the same picture of the
okay,
little frame piece holder.
so let me stop and I'm going to share something
Okay.
else. I'm going to share this. Okay, so you see that it says that Beekeepers at Faith Apiaries.
Yes, yes, we do. 3D
Okay,
warehouse, get SketchUp.
yeah. So you can go to I can't quite see the URL; it's covered up, but 3dwarehouse.sketchup.com, and there's the URL includes that bman. So if you can see that, maybe you write that down.
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yeah. Yep. I'll put it in the chat.
I'll give you a second to do that. I'll just kind of talk about it. I'll scroll down here. So I put a lot of my diagrams in this SketchUp library. I've got equipment here that I don't even necessarily build. I've got a mini frame building jig, 6-way migratory pallet that somebody asked me to build, my 3-way, my quad mini mating nukes, the parts caddy is here, my hive stand, my lids. This is a really good one, the assembly jig for the Langstroth beehive frames. This is not a hard project to build, and it will help you immensely in building frames. It's sized to build about 10 frames at a time, so it's a good size for most people because it's a box of frames. So it's so I have I mean if you look, I don't want to shamelessly plug my channel, but I do have more closer to um, uh, tutorial videos even on a lot of this stuff. I know I have a couple of videos on building this jig. I know I have videos on how I build my covers and my pallets and how I build frames. So watch the watch the dates on some things, especially the frames, because it seems like every year I build my frames a little differently. And it might be the same product, but maybe it's a little different method. So pick the most recent one that you can find. Anything on that you want to ask, Brian?
And I would just kind of wrap up with doing exactly that, of just kind of talking about your YouTube channel. I know Brad really well, and I know all of his skill sets because of his YouTube videos that he's put on. You know, he does a weekly YouTube channel where he talks about what he's doing in the bee yard that week. And at this time of the year, a lot of that work is not in the bee yard, it's in the wood shop. So he's got a lot of great videos. The reason I've asked him on is because I've personally learned a lot of stuff about woodworking just by watching his videos. If you want to go and check him out, he is that bee man at Faith Apiaries on YouTube. Once we post this to our CSBA YouTube channel, I'll make sure I have this link for the SketchUp as well as a couple of the videos that Brad was talking about. He's got a great migratory lid video that I go back to regularly whenever I build my migratory lids, and a couple of others that are based on the wood shop as well. That's my hope for this sustainability expert chat, is that we get people like Brad who are experts on all different types of topics under the beekeeping umbrella, and that if you walk away with just one idea from this hour and a half of conversation that's going to make you a better beekeeper, it's going to save you money, it's going to save you time, it's going to build some efficiency. I consider that a great investment in your time. So Brad, is there anything else you want to add before wrapping up the evening? Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your expertise. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, if anybody wants to contact me, um, wasn't prepared for that. Probably the easiest way to tell you is go to that YouTube channel, and there's a part on every YouTube channel. It's got a little more. You click on more, and you get a little window that opens, and there's an email address in there that you can use to contact me if you want. I try to reply to all the emails, but if you're going to ask me questions, I'm not very swift sometimes. So if you're going to ask me questions, make sure it's clear what you want to know, and I'll do my best to fill in what you're wanting to clarify.
All right, so Brad, I'll let you get going. Again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate all of your expertise. And again, Colorado beekeepers, look for this talk on our YouTube channel. If you have not yet subscribed to our CSBA YouTube channel, I totally understand because we're just starting to build content, but now is definitely the time to do so. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll be doing another one next month. Brad, have a great night. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.